At the beginning of the year, I made a video exploring the origins of the days of the week in the English language. We learned that many of these words came from Old English and Old Norse. To find out more, click on the question mark. Happily, this video was well received, and it led to some of you asking for a follow-on exploring the origins of the months of the year. Well, I'm nothing if not suggestible, so without further ado, let's take a closer look at the months of the year. Our calendar begins with the Romans and a 10-month year. It was extended by Julius Caesar to 12 months and then tweaked under Pope Gregory XIII. It is thought that Julius Caesar introduced his Julian calendar after spending time in Egypt. His modifications reflected the Egyptian system and the solar year. This reckoning served people well, until in the 16th century the calendar was tweaked to more accurately represent the solar cycle. Pope Gregory XIII introduced it, and thus the Gregorian calendar, our calendar, was born. However, the Roman, Latin names of the month barely changed from one calendar to the next, from generation to generation. So, let us begin with January. What is the root of January? Well, it's Janus, or Janus. Janus was a special god. He had two faces. This gave him very particular associations. The Romans connected him with beginnings and transitions, gates and doorways. It is easy therefore to see why they would connect him with both the beginning and the end of the year, January. So, the second month of the year. What about February? Well, February comes from the Latin februa. Februa was a Roman festival of purification and washing, whose goddess was Februs. One can imagine much washing taking place at this time of year, with Romans ritually preparing for the months ahead, much like a spring clean. This was also the festival of the spring rains, vital and refreshing. It is worthwhile mentioning that for a while the Romans had no winter months. Quite literally there was a gap in their year during the winter. This will be important later, but now on to March. March was an important month, named after the Roman god Mars. Mars was the Roman god of war, whose equivalent in the Greek pantheon was Ares. Not only did he thaw the ground ready for agriculture, but this was the beginning of the Roman military campaigning season, and quite naturally named after the god of war. The fourth month of the year is April, whose roots are in the Latin Aprilis, a word which is similar to the Latin for opening, and thus names a time of the year when buds begin to open. It is worthwhile mentioning that in Old English, April was called Oistormanath. The root of the word Easter, Oyster was the goddess of dawn, new life with the coming of spring. Next, on to month number 5, May. Well, May comes from the Greek goddess, Maia. The Romans had adopted this Greek goddess as a goddess of growth. It therefore makes perfect sense to name a growing season after her. However, the Roman poet Ovid suggests an alternative root for the word Maia. He suggests that this month was dedicated to the Maiores, the Latin for elders. With month number 6 we are halfway there, June, the root of which may be Juno, the Roman goddess and wife of Jupiter. The equivalent of the Greek goddess Hera, she was effectively queen of the gods. However, once again, our good friend Ovid offers an alternative explanation for the month of June, whose root for him lay in the Latin juniores, meaning younger ones, although not this young, between 17 and 47. Let us move on from me butchering Latin to the month of July, named after Julius, the Julii, or the Julii. It was apparently in an act of tribute that Augustus named this month after his adopted father, Julius Caesar. Any glory which reflected back upon him from this venerable figure was merely a happy side effect. Month 8 is August, named after, yes, Augustus. It was the Senate in 8 BC who insisted that Augustus accept this honour. Being a humble man, merely first citizen, he did so with due humility. However, he did request that the month he triumphed over Mark Antony and Cleopatra be the one named after him. Next we come to month number 9, September, whose Latin root is septem, the number 7. Why 7? Well, it all stems from a time when March was number 1. You may recall that at one point the Roman calendar had no winter months. 2 months were missing. The calendar was reckoned with the beginning of the farming season in March. This meant September was number 7. So what about October? October has its roots in octo, and this in turn is the Latin for number 8. From here you may see a pattern emerging. November was named after the Latin novem, meaning number 9. And I'll give you a wild guess what the root of December, decem or decem, meant. Yes, number 10. So to continue our pictorial metaphor, March is number 1, September's taken, October and November are those guys there, and December, well, that's the cameraman. Thus, unlike the days of the week, which are largely based on a pantheon of Germanic gods, such as Thor, the months of the year are, broadly speaking, a Roman invention, or at the very least, the words which we use to describe them are. Indeed, the word calendar has its roots in the Latin calende. This was the first day of every month of the Roman year. And there we have it, calendars explored, the months of the year and why we call them what we do. That's one more item checked off my list of things to do today. Now, where's my copy of Current Archaeology gone? Well, it's officially a new year. ArchaeoSoup has done its roundup of 2011, and for many this is a time when we contemplate our shiny new calendars. We add birthdays and social events to our new calendars, and occasionally we may stop to think and wonder just why on earth are the days of the week called what they are. If this is you, then never fear, ArchaeoSoup is here. I'll put my red nose away and get straight into tackling the first day of the working week, Monday. For many, Monday is a manic day, a day when people are rushing to get back to the office, often stuck in traffic jams, or worse still, they have to go back to school. You can therefore be forgiven for thinking that Monday might mean Moan Day. However, when you take a closer look at the words which make up our days of the week, we soon realise that they come from a very specific time and place. The Saxons and the Vikings contributed to what we call the days of the week. In other words, our words for the days of the week are more than 1,000 years old. So, Monday does not in fact come from Moanday. Instead, its roots are in Old English, specifically Monundag. And what does Monundag mean? Well, it means the moon's day. Monday, therefore, or Moon Day, was a day dedicated to the moon. This is not because it was a dark day, but rather for the early Saxons and for the Vikings, the sun and the moon were personified in godlike figures. Mani, the moon, and Sol, his sister, the sun. This day also offered a chance to contemplate the changing moon throughout the month. The next day of the week is, of course, Tuesday, and this day also has its roots in Old English, specifically Tuesdag. For the early Saxons and the Vikings, Tuesdag was in fact Tyr's Day. Tyr figured prominently in Norse mythology. He was son of Odin, god of war, a brave god. When the gods needed to bind the massive wolf Fenrir, it was Tyr who offered his arm as forfeit. The wolf was bound, and Fenrir took the arm. A brave god indeed. So, do we have any ideas where Wednesday or Wednesday may come from? Well, it comes from the Old English Wodnesdag. Woden was one of the names for the king of the gods. This was Odin's day. Sat in the middle of the week, one could hardly avoid the day of Odin, the king of the gods, the one-eyed wise man, with 2 pet ravens, one for thought and one for memory. This meant he knew everything. Now, surely Thursday is an easy one to guess. Thursday, Well, in Old English, Thursday was Thunrusdag. Any ideas? Yes, that's right. We're talking about Thor's Day. Thor is probably the most famous of the Norse and Germanic gods. He was a god of lightning and power, and wielded a small, if effective, hammer called Mjolnir. Here he is, twisting his beard into the shape of his hammer. Thor was popular, charismatic, sometimes very stupid, but always very brave. Next we come to Friday. Going on the pattern, whose day might Friday be? Well, the Old English is Frigadag. Well, this quite simply means Frigg's Day. Frigg, sometimes known as Frigga, was the wife of Odin, queen of Asgard, and mother to a very popular god, Balder. In Old English, Frigg is a byword for a beloved lady, and together with Odin they ruled over all the gods. She is also thought to have been able to weave with clouds. Next, of course, we come to Saturday, and Saturday is peculiar. You see, if you were from a certain part of Britain 1,000 years ago, namely the Danelaw, you may not have called Saturday Saturday at all. You would probably have called Saturday something like Lordag. The reason for this is that it had a very particular function. It was laundry day, washing day by the river. Only one day a week, you cry. Well, at least they were washing. In other parts of Britain, Saturday was known as Sunnanefn. This quite literally meant the eve of Sunday, or Sunday's eve. However, eventually Old English did adopt another name, that being Saternsdag. What could this be? Well, it's very similar to Saturday, and it comes from a completely different collection of gods, after one of whom a whole planet is named. Any ideas? Yes, that's right, you got it. It's Saturn, the god of agriculture and a good harvest. He was also the father of the Roman king of the gods, Jupiter. Finally, we come to the 7th day of the week, Sunday. Now, in Old English, Sunday was known as Sunnandag. Any ideas whose day this might be? Well, hopefully you've figured out it was the sun's day, preceding the moon's day, Monday. This was a day dedicated to the sun and the crucial role the sun plays in daily life. Together, the sun and her brother the moon ran through the sky, pursued by wolves. So, when examining your shiny new calendar, bear in mind that the days of the week in English and some other languages largely owe their names to the pantheon of Germanic and Norse gods.
To most Americans, the Pilgrims of Plymouth, Massachusetts are the iconic inspiration for today's Thanksgiving feast. After the winter of 1620 killed almost half of their people, the colonists formed a relationship with the neighboring Wampanoag tribe, who taught them about fishing, planting, and hunting. By autumn of 1621, the colonists had collected enough food to feed the community through the coming winter. The Wampanoags joined the colonists for a 3-day feast in honor of their bounty. The feast probably did not include our modern Thanksgiving staple, turkey. More likely, the colonists and Wampanoags dined on roast goose, along with corn, codfish, and lobster. This 1621 harvest meal is now commonly thought of as the first Thanksgiving. Yet for later generations of colonists, New England days of Thanksgiving had little to do with the 1621 harvest festival. Theirs was a religious holiday, descended from Puritan days of fasting, prayer, and giving thanks to God. Every autumn, the governor of each colony would declare days of thanksgiving for bountiful harvests, victorious battles, or drought-ending rains. In 1777, the Continental Congress decreed that all 13 of America's colonies celebrate a national day of Thanksgiving that year in celebration of their victory over the British at Saratoga. By the mid-19th century, many states celebrated the holiday. However, the date could vary by weeks or even months. A determined magazine editor named Sarah Josepha Hale set about establishing a national Thanksgiving Day. She passionately believed that such a day would help unite a nation headed towards civil war. Hale began a one-woman letter-writing campaign, urging politicians to establish an annual day of Thanksgiving. Her efforts were finally rewarded by Abraham Lincoln, who saw the unifying potential of the holiday. In 1863, 4 months after the victory at Gettysburg, he declared the last Thursday of November to be Thanksgiving Day. By the 20th century, Thanksgiving was a welcome day of leisure from a 6-day work week. In the 1920s, the National Football League was formed. In an effort to boost attendance, the fledgling Detroit Lions devised the concept of a Thanksgiving Day game. Parades also became a Turkey Day tradition, and department stores quickly saw their value as a kickoff to the Christmas shopping season. The Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade began in 1924, and year after year, millions of New Yorkers braved the cold to watch the festivities. Most of all, Thanksgiving is about family. With modern life moving faster than ever, Thanksgiving gives us a day to take a collective breath, reconnect with loved ones, and remember just how much we have to be thankful for.
Here's the turkey.
Most American colonists were still loyal to King George up until the 1770s. But when England subjected her subjects to increased control over colonial affairs, it started a revolution. A 5-man committee was appointed to draft the Declaration of Independence. This outlined the colony's desire for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. On sunny July 4th, the Congress approved the Declaration of Independence. The first July 4th celebration happened on July 8th, when the document was publicly read in Philadelphia. The crowd reacted with gunfire, bonfires, and fireworks. This custom was borrowed from England, of all places, which is how subjects rang in their king's birthday. Only in the colonies, they were celebrating the king's symbolic funeral. As King George sat safely on his throne in the summer of '76, his likeness in crudely fashioned dummies was burned in the colonies. In New York City, the equestrian statue of King George was hacked up and reportedly smelted into bullets for the Revolution. 1 year later, citizens of Philadelphia honored Independence Day with fireworks, bonfires, and music. During the Revolutionary War, troops celebrated the Declaration's anniversary with double portions of rum. Actual bombs replaced the fireworks. After the colonies won their independence, cities across the U.S. relived the revolution by participating in the July 4th revelries. Men commemorated the day by gathering in taverns to drink and argue over the new nation's leaders. It was a purely American custom to freely criticize the government. On the 50th anniversary, by eerie coincidence, both the Declaration's author and its editor, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, died July 4th, 1826. Eventually, Americans looked at Independence Day not so much as a day of rebellion, but as a day to appreciate the rights bestowed on them. In 1870, as America was healing from the Civil War and African Americans were freed from slavery, Independence Day became a recognized holiday. But if federal workers wanted to spend the day picnicking, they did it without pay. That changed in 1938, when Congress voted to make Independence Day a legal holiday. Since then, the holiday has been celebrated in good times and in bad, in war and in peace. American communities rally together, all because of that small act of bureaucracy in 1776 that started a free nation. Easter, the holiest day of the Christian calendar, a celebration of Jesus Christ's resurrection from the dead. So what does this miracle have to do with a bunny delivering painted eggs? The answer lies in 100 generations of rituals and customs. According to the Gospels of the New Testament, Jesus Christ and his apostles entered Jerusalem to observe Passover, the Jewish holy season that celebrates the Hebrews' release from slavery. After the Passover supper, Jesus was arrested, and on what is now called Good Friday, he was crucified. 2 days later, he rose from the dead. Those of Jewish origin were the first to celebrate the resurrection, likely as a new facet of the Passover festival. In fact, the Easter celebration was called Pascha. It's derived from the word Pesach, the Jewish translation for Passover. Originally, Easter was celebrated 2 days after Passover, so it fell on any day of the week. But Easter Wednesday just didn't feel right. In 325 AD, Roman Emperor Constantine and the Council of Nicaea ruled that Easter must fall only on a Sunday, the day when Christ rose. Easter Sunday would be the first Sunday to follow the full moon after the spring equinox. It could occur anywhere between March 22nd and April 25th. Around this same time, Christians began one of the first recorded rituals of the modern Easter celebration, the lighting of the Paschal candle, its flame a reminder of Christ's resurrection, light out of darkness. As Christianity spread throughout Europe, different pagan customs blended into the holidays. In fact, the actual word Easter may have come from Estra, the goddess of spring and fertility, which brings us to the Easter egg. Eggs have been a mythological symbol of birth for thousands of years. Christians adopted the egg as an Easter custom sometime around the 13th century. The yolk inside a shell represented Christ's emergence from the tomb. Eggs were painted red to represent the blood Christ shed on the cross. The colorful Easter egg soon hatched its own traditions. A popular one was egg rolling. In 1876, Congress prohibited kids from playing on the Capitol grounds. So, President Rutherford B. Hayes opened the White House lawn to the little rollers. After that, the White House Easter egg roll became a tradition. So when did that Easter bunny hop into the scene? The fertile rabbit had long been a symbol of new life in European pagan celebrations. Beginning around the 16th century, parents told children that if they behaved, on the eve of Easter, the Osterhaus would come and lay colorful eggs. Children built nests in their homes to entice the rabbit to visit. And so began the customs of the Easter egg hunt and the Easter basket. To help fill out those baskets, 19th century European chocolatiers began making egg-shaped chocolates. The sweet trend quickly spread throughout the world. Today, billions of dollars are spent each year on Easter candy. Easter. It's a joyful day when Christians celebrate the resurrection. For 2,000 years, customs have been added, some spiritual and some fun. But Easter is also the time for families to gather and welcome spring, when new life emerges after the dead of winter.
From communion with the dead to pumpkins and pranks, Halloween is a patchwork holiday stitched together with cultural, religious, and occult traditions that span centuries. It all began with the Celts, a people whose culture had spread across Europe more than 2,000 years ago. October 31st was the day they celebrated the end of the harvest season in a festival called Samhain. That night also marked the Celtic New Year and was considered a time between years, a magical time when the ghost of the dead walked the earth.
It was the time when the veil between death and life was supposed to be at its thinnest.
On Samhain, the villagers gathered and lit huge bonfires to drive the dead back to the spirit world and keep them away from the living. But as the Catholic Church's influence grew in Europe, it frowned on the pagan rituals like Samhain. In the 7th century, the Vatican began to merge it with a church-sanctioned holiday. So November 1st was designated All Saints' Day to honor martyrs and the deceased faithful.
Both of these holidays had to do with the afterlife and about survival after death. It was a calculated move on the part of the church to bring more people into the fold.
All Saints' Day was known then as Hallowmas. Hallow means holy or saintly, so the translation is roughly Mass of the Saints. The night before, October 31st, was All Hallows' Eve, which gradually morphed into Halloween. The holiday came to America with the wave of Irish immigrants during the potato famine of the 1840s. They brought several of their holiday customs with them, including bobbing for apples and playing tricks on neighbors, like removing gates from the front of houses. The young pranksters wore masks so they wouldn't be recognized. But over the years, the tradition of harmless tricks grew into outright vandalism.
Back in the 1930s, it really became a dangerous holiday. I mean, there was such hooliganism and vandalism. Trick-or-treating was originally an extortion deal. Give us candy or we'll trash your house.
Storekeepers and neighbors began giving treats or bribes to stop the tricks, and children were encouraged to travel door to door for treats as an alternative to troublemaking. By the late 30s, trick or treat became the holiday greeting.
For all its popularity, history doesn't give us any guarantees as to the origins of Valentine's Day. But we do know it contains vestiges of the early Christian church and ancient Rome. The association between mid-February and romance goes back to a pagan festival known as Lupercalia, likely honoring either Lupa, the she-wolf of Rome who suckled Romulus and Remus, or Faunus, their god of fertility. The festivities began with an animal sacrifice. Then the ritualistic slapping of young women with strips of the animal's skin and blood to bestow fertility for the coming year. In the 5th century, perhaps in an effort to Christianize the pagan festival, Pope Gelasius declared February 14th as St. Valentine's Day. As for the real St. Valentine, there were reportedly several canonized by the Church. Legend has it that one St. Valentine, a defiant Roman priest, lived during the 3rd century AD under Emperor Claudius II. Claudius was an ambitious ruler. His battles required vast armies of men to abandon their young families for long periods of time, resulting in a military that was half-hearted and homesick. So determined was Claudius to stop love from sapping the will of his armies, he banned marriages altogether. Father Valentine thought the ban unjust and defied the emperor, continuing to marry young lovers in secret. The emperor eventually caught on to the priest's actions, arrested him, and sentenced him to death. It is believed that young couples he had secretly wed would visit his cell, passing him flowers and notes through the bars as symbols of their gratitude. The story continues that the condemned Father Valentine fell in love with his jailer's daughter. On February 14th, the day he was executed, it is said he passed the young girl a note. It was signed, "From your Valentine." A tradition was born. Cupid, the winged matchmaker, started out as the Roman god of love, inspired the image of cherubs for Christians, and is now a favorite of card makers and mass marketers. Our modern Valentine's Day, removed from its religious and pagan past, has evolved into one of the most celebrated holidays on the calendar. On average, Americans shower their loved ones with 180 million roses, red ones naturally, and almost 36 million heart-shaped boxes of candy, not to mention all those cards, dinners, and diamonds. All told, the holiday brings in almost $14 billion annually, giving retailers plenty to love as well. But if you're worried that you can't afford to treat your loved one properly next Valentine's Day, take heart. The poets were right. Love is really all you need. The Industrial Revolution modernized the United States and Canada during the 19th century. As people enjoyed steady employment, they compromised their rights in the workplace. Longer work hours and pay cuts were imposed. U.S. labor groups began protecting themselves by unionizing. In Canada, unions were illegal until 1872, when thousands of Ottawa laborers marched to Prime Minister John Macdonald's home. That year, Canada wiped the anti-union law from its books, and the march became an annual Canadian tradition. In 1882, Toronto labor officials invited an American union leader, Peter J. Maguire, to Toronto's labor celebrations. Maguire was so impressed that he suggested a workers' parade to New York City's Central Labor Union. He chose September 5th as the date because it filled the long void between July 4th and Thanksgiving. Coincidentally, that same year, a machinist from Paterson, New Jersey, Matthew Maguire, also proposed a laborers' celebration. On Tuesday, September 5th, 1882, thousands of New York City laborers marched from City Hall to Union Square. They gathered in Reservoir Park for an afternoon of picnics, concerts, and speeches rallying for an 8-hour workday. 2 years later, the Central Labor Union moved the parade to the first Monday in September. They also encouraged all U.S. cities to follow New York's lead and march for the working man's holiday. For many, the choice was to either spend the day at work or march without pay. That began to change when Oregon became the first state to legalize the Labor Day holiday in 1887. Other states, including New York, soon followed. It took a political disaster to put Labor Day on the national calendar. In 1894, railway workers in Pullman, Illinois went on strike to protest wage cuts. President Grover Cleveland faced pressure to end the demonstrations and sent 12,000 federal troops to break the strike. Violence erupted. 2 strikers were killed, and Cleveland's harsh methods made headlines. In an attempt to appease the nation's workers, he signed a bill to make Labor Day a federal holiday. Cleveland still lost that year's election. America's workers continued to gain power through the 1950s, when over a third of all labor forces were unionized. Labor Day had become a time to rally workers for safer conditions, fair pay, and benefits. But in the second half of the 20th century, the U.S. labor force diminished. Many factories closed. Jobs were outsourced to other countries. Today, workers still parade through blue-collar neighborhoods on Labor Day, and speeches unite the ever-dwindling labor force. But the day's true call has quieted. For now, most Americans leisurely enjoy the holiday as summer's last bow. Italians have long celebrated Christopher Columbus in tribute to their shared heritage. In 1937, President Roosevelt proclaimed October 12th as Columbus Day. And in 1971, President Nixon declared Columbus Day a national holiday to be observed on the second Monday of October. Okay, and why? Because Columbus discovered America and proved that the Earth was round. Except that's not quite how it happened, which isn't to say we don't have plenty to thank him for. Let's take a look at Christopher Columbus, the man behind the myth, behind the holiday. We all know how it started. On August 3rd, 1492, Columbus and his 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, set out from Spain and embarked on an historic journey. True, but let's settle the why once and for all. Columbus wasn't trying to prove the Earth was round. He didn't need to. Greek mathematician Pythagoras suspected we were living on a sphere as early as the 6th century BC. And Aristotle backed him up 2 centuries later when he noticed the Earth's shadow could be seen during a lunar eclipse, sliding past the moon in miniature, and it was round. So why did Columbus bother getting off the couch at all? Money. In the 15th century, spices were a hot commodity. Traders shipping them between Asia and Europe could get rich quick. However, with the fall of Constantinople to the Turks, Europe lost its most popular route to the treasures of the East. Columbus realized his opportunity, become the first person to plot a western route to Asia and enjoy unprecedented glory and riches. Inconsistent maps made calculating routes difficult. Columbus finally charted a southwestern course he believed was short enough to keep him and his men from dying of starvation and thirst. Spain's Queen Isabella, eager to expand her empire, agreed to roll the dice on Columbus's route. So on that August morning in 1492, Columbus and his men sailed off in those famous ships, laden with hopes of finding their way to Asia and making both Spain and themselves a heck of a lot of money. After a pit stop in the Canary Islands, the charted world was behind them. Columbus had been right not to trust existing maps. but he didn't realize that his own plotted course to Asia was short by nearly 10,000 miles. Luckily, a series of islands, the future West Indies, lay almost exactly where he believed India to be, and the relieved sailors made landfall. This is where things get tricky. We're still not sure of the exact location where Columbus first landed, but he was convinced he'd made it to India and declared the route successful. Mission accomplished. The Indians who greeted him were actually an indigenous people who had lived there for centuries. So the claim that Columbus discovered the Americas is only true from a European perspective. But as far as Columbus was concerned, he was right where he'd expected to be. In an exotic land full of natives and spices. Columbus returned to the Spanish court a hero. All were convinced the route was a success, and it surely was, but not as they'd expected. Columbus inadvertently achieved the monumental task of joining the two hemispheres, in effect doubling the size of the habitable planet and establishing trade between the continents. So, on Columbus Day, raise a glass to famed navigator Christopher Columbus, who missed the mark and hit it just the same.